Peace, y'all, and welcome to Gather and Heal, the podcast. My name is Vanessa Sujey, and I am your holistic host. Basically, we're going to have lots of combos. Sometimes it'll be just me, and sometimes we'll have some guests. No matter what the topic is, though, I'm going to make sure that it connects right back to your emotional wellness and healing journey.
Take one.
4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So welcome back, y'all. I am super, super excited. I know I say that all the time, but no, like for real, I'm like super, super excited for today's guest. We have Antonio joining us, and I was fortunate to be a guest on one of your lives a few months ago now, actually. I think it was March. And what? The conversation, it just I didn't want it to stop. It was so good. We were just going and talking and all of that good stuff. So
Right.
the moment I launched this podcast, I knew it. I was like, I need you on at least one episode. I'm sure you'll be back.
Let's see what happens.
That's right. That's right. We find our people, we connect, and we just
That's
keep it
right.
going.
That's right.
So today, Antonio likes to talk about well, you know what? I'm gonna pause. I'm gonna let you do the intro because it's always just a conversation and I don't read people's bios. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us, who are your people? What do you do for fun? And then we'll go from there.
All right. Okay. So there's so much to say, but I guess I'll start with the formalities, right? So my name is Antonio Morales. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm the founder of the Liberated Self Therapeutic Services, LLC. And the whole intention behind the Liberated Self Therapeutic Services, LLC, is to address and challenge the adverse impact that white supremacy has on Black and brown folk. Now, a lot of times when I talk about white supremacy, people think I'm being sort of political, and I am in a sense, but not really, right? When we think about the ideology of white supremacy, it's really me sort of addressing how we've been conditioned inside of the context of white supremacy and how that's degraded and dehumanized us as Black and brown folk. And so the whole intention of my private practice is to address that, because when we internalize something, right, like the ideology of white supremacy, which has a lot of different ideas, values, and customs that we sort of, it becomes part of our subconscious mind. The intention is to address and challenge that because it impacts our lives in so many ways, not just on a systemic level, but on a spiritual and a metaphysical level, and a psychological level, of course. And so the intention is to basically support my community with breaking out of the spell that we're under when it comes to white supremacy. And because you can see it in so many ways that we show up in the world. You can see it in our relationships with our family members and our romantical partners. You can see white supremacy, even though you might not link it to white supremacy. If you sort of go back and go back and go back, right, and really get a sense of what this pattern of behavior is coming from, you'll be able to link it to white supremacy, because a lot of the dysfunctions that we deal with in our community stems right back to white supremacy. And it's not dysfunctions like saying that we're dysfunctional, but we do have issues that we need to address, especially generational racial trauma, right? So the historical impact that has sort of bled itself into our lives is still very real and there. And we're continuously getting re-traumatized because of what's going on still in America, right?
Yes.
And so that's the whole, that's the gist of the Liberated Self Therapeutic Services. It's deeper than that. There's actually a seminar that the Liberated Self Therapeutic Services came from, and it's called the Liberated Self Seminar, which I actually started with Rutgers students. My first seminar I did was in 2020, and it was a few years that it took me to sort of develop it. But the whole intention of the seminar, which there is still a seminar, right? But so the whole intention of it is to deal with the double consciousness or the dual consciousness that Du Bois talks about. There's like two selves that we sort of operate with in the world, right? So what I call them is the oppressed self versus the liberated self. And so part of what I do in the seminar is have our people recognize the oppressed self, because a lot of times we don't understand, or we're not aware of how we operate inside the oppressed self, mostly because of all of the messages that we receive that sort of support and maintain the oppressed self, right? In a white supremacist society. And so I have my clients or my participants look at the oppressed self, because we don't understand that gets in the way, that context. And After having them recognize and become aware of the oppressed self, then I have them shift into creating the liberated self, right? So basically, and so that's the gist of my private practice. So there's sort of
Dope.
two ways about it. There's like the private practice with the one-on-one stuff, and then there's like the seminar, right? So there's two ways of doing work, and I appreciate seminar more because I feel like in community, when we see each other, we see ourselves in a way that we won't see ourselves on a one-on-one basis. So,
Right.
and so that's that.
That's
Okay.
dope.
So you
Wait,
want?
I got a question. I got a question. I got so many questions. So, do you still run the seminar?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't done it since. So the last seminar I did was leap year. So Black History Month in 2020. So that was the leap year. That was February 27th, February 28th, and 29th. That was
Gotcha.
2020. That was actually the first time I actually did the full seminar, because I've been practicing bits and pieces of it, but I never did the full. So it's a weekend seminar. So that was the time that I did the weekend seminar, and then right after that we went on lockdown. Right. So the seminars still exist, but now I have to sort of regenerate the conversation around it to have people understand. I'm trying to do it again in the fall. Hopefully, I've already talked to some student orgs around the seminar still. So yeah, it still exists, but I haven't sort of did the next one yet because of the pandemic. You can't be in a room with people. I mean, now hopefully we can, and things will keep going, forward, and we'll be able to start being in the community a lot more. So that was the thing that really stopped the progression of it.
Gotcha. And I've always been intrigued, and I love the name of your practice. How did you come to naming it the Liberated Self?
Oh, it's a great question. So I was a lot of times I come up with ideas. I have a lot of ideas in my brain. Sometimes I don't know how to articulate them. And so one time the poster boards, the paper that you stick on the wall, the big giant white thing. So I have put one in my office, and I drew a circle, and I put oppression. And then I put oppression all around the circle, right? And then in the circle was the self. So the focus was the self, like the person and environment, right? And so person and environment, and then oppression, and then oppression. And then I just left it there. And like I was just trying to figure out, what am I trying to say? Because I understood that, because I was thinking about racism before I even used the word white supremacy. Now everything's white supremacy because I understand it like an umbrella term now. So I was looking at all the oppressive factors that we deal with as Black and brown folk, right? And because my focus is working with Black and brown folk, because all my life I've been working with Black and brown folk, whether it's being an intern or a case manager, or whether it was being a counselor, an advocate counselor. So my whole life I've been working with the same communities in different contexts. And I understood and knew that there was something that we was dealing with across the board. It didn't matter who you was, where you was coming from, what your identity was, as far as like your status, your class, what your educational level was. I knew there was something going on with our community, but I couldn't pinpoint it, right? And it's all about mental health. So I was always thinking about what's going on with our psychology.
Right.
And the more experience I had in the field, the more curious I became to understanding what was the answer. So then obviously I came up eventually with systemic racism, which all the literature speaks about. But I was never taught how it was the white supremacy was linked to our mindset, right? A mental well-being or lack of mental well-being. And so I had this thing, right, on the paper, right, just hanging there. And I would just stare at it, because that's how I come up with ideas. I just stare at something visual that I created, and then bang, it just hit me, the oppressed self. That was it. That was the oppressed self. That was what hit me, was the oppressed self. So the oppressed self came before the liberated self, right? So I got the oppressed self first as a distinction based on that thing that I was looking at. And I said, that's what it is. We are living in the oppressed self, right? As a sort of context, as a mindset. And that was it. It was like a light bulb, right? And then I was like, okay, so if there's the oppressed self, then what's the opposite of that, right? Because oppression has to do with the context that we live inside of still, right? And the sort of, in the new world, we think about the beginning of colonialism, right?
Mm.
Europeans came, right? That was the beginning of us dealing with oppression, right? From an outside force.
Right.
So when the oppressed self inside the context of white supremacy is what we have to grapple with. And so then the question was, what's the opposite of that? And then the liberated self popped up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like these things is just, and I understand. I've seen, like, when you think about the double consciousness of dual consciousness, I thought it was the perfect language to sort of explain what the boy
Mm-hmm.
anyway. You know what I'm
Yes.
saying?
Yes.
Does that explain? So that's how it came out. It was just very organic, very sort of leaning into the universe, and whatever the universe was sort of, whatever signals the universe was giving me.
Yes.
That's how I get a lot of my inspiration. I sort of go within. I sort of lean in, and that's really how it happened. I mean, and you
Mm.
know, and it comes from understanding that when we talk about mental health and we sort of get into the context of psychotherapy, we're having a philosophical conversation about the human experience. Right?
Mm-hmm.
This is philosophical, this conversation. Right?
Right.
As much as we want to make it medical, right? Clinical, it's
Right.
a philosophical conversation about what we're dealing with as human beings. And I understood that when I was in the undergraduate program, and I was in one of my philosophy classes, which was amazing. I was like,
Mm.
I'm supposed to be a philosopher. I'm supposed to go get a PhD in philosophy. That's what that's what I was thinking. And when it hit me is when I learned about the Plato's cave allegory. When it's a
Share
beautiful,
more.
so the cave allegory basically is about, people living in a cave, and they're sort of relating to the shadows on the wall, but that's actually a reflection of a fire that's, I don't know if it was behind them or in front of them, but they were
Mm-hmm.
relating to the shadows on the wall in the cave. So they thought that the shadows on the wall was reality.
Mm.
It existed like that was real, but they was in a cave. Somebody found a way out the cave, and saw the sun, saw the light, right? So someone got escaped the cave and saw reality, like life, right? Or the real sun, like real, like trees and plants and
Mm.
life. And that someone came down back to the cave because they had escaped. They're like, yo, y'all look in their shadows. Like, this shit is not what it is, right? And nobody believed them.
Of course.
Nobody, they believed the shadows on the wall, right?
Mm.
And so it's very much the oppressed self is the shadows on the wall, right? And
Mm.
you got to understand we're in the cave of white supremacy. And so when we escape that, some of us escape it and we recognize, holy shit, what was I dealing with my whole life?
Mm.
And then we want to tell people downstairs who are in the cave, but ain't nobody paying attention. You know what I'm saying? Because they're like,
Mm.
everything out of you white supremacy because you're in the cave. But
Mm.
and through that, Plato's the allegory of the cave, that really like sat with me for
Yeah.
for years. It's just I thought it was the most profound conversation ever. And it's funny because I don't know if you heard in New York there's a school. I don't know if it still exists, but it was the School of Practical Philosophy. And
Mm.
I went one weekend just to focus on the cave allegory. And it was powerful. And that's just something that's always, and that sort of informs my work.
Yeah. And I like how you take that and you relate it to right now in a way like the cave of white supremacy, right? And how there are still people in the cave and they're like, nah, there's nothing out there. We're gonna stay right here. We're good.
We're gonna keep trucking and jiving for massa.
Right. Like absolutely not. The fuck out the cave.
I hope
um,
that answered your question.
It did. It did. I really appreciate that. And I mean, you know that I work from an internal family systems lens. So the liberated self, it is so powerful for me when I hear it, right? Because I think about it the same way you're talking about, where it's this internal process, right? My higher self, my self energy is within. And I want this self and self energy to be liberated. And then that way I'm taking good care of myself, showing up the way that I want to and I need to genuinely. And hopefully, it has its ripple effect when I'm out in the community, when we're out doing the work or when we're out just having regular ass conversations, that my liberated self meets your liberated self. And you and you and everybody else feels that empowerment to come through and just be free, be truly liberated, and recognize the oppression that is around us, but not get sucked into it. You ain't gonna suck me back into that fucking cave.
Nope, I ain't having it. Exactly. I'm
Not at all.
not about that life.
No. You know what's dope too is to hear your creative process. So I enjoy it because my creative process is very similar. I've got whiteboards. Um, Before we moved to Tampa, when we were living in Boston, I had two big ass whiteboards up on the wall. And it was in a dining room because it was an apartment in Boston, this small. And on one side, it had all of the things for my first company, Sustaining Hope and Wellness. And then on the second one, it was like my brainstorm where I would just jot down the ideas and just like you, walk away. I don't know what this means. I don't know what I'm gonna do with it. I'm gonna just leave it right here.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's the same. It's, it's like, even though we don't know what it means, we have to put it somewhere so we can see it. I mean, for me, visually, I have to see it. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? When I was 23 years old, actually before that, maybe I was 21 years old, I was into writing. And so I published a magazine called Fíjate Magazine. And it was a Latino magazine. I did only one issue because that was right before September 11th. Right. So the summer of September 11th is when I published it and then put it on the newsstands. I had the same process with that particular magazine where I didn't even like know like nothing about like what it was supposed to be, but I just kept like doing visuals and printing them and like putting them on the wall.
Yeah.
And then the magazine came to life. But it's the same sort of process, sort of. And there's so, and I feel like you probably relate to this, like the creativity, like it's like actually tapping into the creativity, right? Like creative spirits. And I think that is what I love most about the work that I do is it comes from a creative energy from is really tapping into the universe. And I think that's part of, and I'm sure you've heard this term, the decolonizing like mental health, right? Like we're tapping into something that's very I don't know how, but this it feels like sacred in some ways. You know what I'm saying?
I agree.
To get into the creativity. So yeah, I'm just like you too. I want to do the whiteboards, but I need like a whole room, like just one giant whiteboard, And I wish that I had the ability to like illustrate, like pictures. Oh my goodness, it would be amazing.
So we have in the kitchen, there's one like big wall, and we painted it with the chalkboard.
Oh, okay.
And I told myself that it was for the baby to be able to like draw on the chalkboard. Mira, man, please, there's nothing on there right now that the baby's drawn. It's mama's list. It's upcoming dates of things.
That was you. All of it was you.
I know.
That's
he doodles sometimes, but it's mostly me.
That's freaking awesome. I love that.
Oh, yeah. But like what you're talking about, like this sacred piece is when we talk about internal family system, self energy is when we're being creative, right? Like that's one of the 8 C's is creativity. And when we get distracted by so many things that are going on around us, or when we get sucked back into that cave, our parts are activated and our self energy can't come through and be creative, right? And so how do we continue to show up as our liberated selves and say, hey, these different parts of me that are coming up that are, feeling pulled towards this white supremacy or is convinced that this is how it needs to be. How do I connect with that part and let them know that's not it for us? There is so much beauty and dopeness and just like amazing opportunities within us and around us that we don't have to get like pigeonholed into whatever the fuck white supremacy is telling us needs to be. Yeah. Okay. So I guess my one last thought is the reality of being business owners too, right? Like I think that people think it's this easy timeline and things flow and it comes through and it's like, no, it's a full creative process.
That's right.
and it takes time. And sometimes you put something down and you walk away from it, and it clicks when it clicks.
That's right. That's right. You know, me, the reason why I was sort of pushed into the Liberated Self therapeutic services was because I was working at Rutgers University and I was dealing with racial discrimination.
Mm.
And, um, they said they wanted, someone who could relate to the Black experience in America, because they didn't have, because basically the counseling center was being criticized for
Mhm.
not being, diverse enough for the Black and brown students. So the Black and
Yep.
brown students were the ones being critical of the counseling center because there was no representation. So, I thought, wow, what a perfect opportunity for me to like apply to this position. And so they hired me right away. But what they wanted on paper was not what they wanted in real life.
Nah.
You know what I'm saying? And so when I came in, I'm very like, I identify as Afro Boricua because I believe in, worshiping or honoring my ancestors.
Hmm.
And, growing up basically as a mixed race person, because my father's more European and my mother's more Black, in the sort of Boricua context, um, my whole life I've been taught to reject my Black self, right?
Mm.
Even you might think about my grandmother, she had all the santos and the saints, and she would light her candles for the orishas. And my father's family is very like judgmental against her practices. And
Mm.
so that, on a sub, I didn't realize what was happening to me, but I was being conditioned to reject the Black self, right?
Hmm.
Because that's African, that comes from Africa.
Hmm.
And so I wasn't taught to embrace that. And so as a political statement, right, I make is to rebel against that idea that we shouldn't embrace our Africanness. I identify as Afro Boricua, right? So
Hmm.
it's not just like saying I'm Afro Boricua because I'm Afro Boricua. I'm Afro Boricua because I understand it and honor the fact that we have African ancestors that is in our bloodline. And I'm not going to reject the African ancestors just because I might look the way I look, right? Because you don't know if I'm African, you don't know if I'm indigenous, you don't know if I'm European. I mean, I'm a mix. But sometimes I look like this, sometimes I look like that. That's why I love the samba. When melody comes back, I feel like myself again. You know
Yes.
what I'm saying? I mean, as a little kid, I was always on the street playing around, right? We was always in the street, so I was always dark.
Yes.
When I got older, I was like not in the street as much, and so I started getting a little light, and I
I
started
know.
questioning myself, looking in
Same,
the mirror.
girl. Same.
Like, I don't know if I can trust you anymore. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do. I used to spend my summers in the Dominican Republic, and I was always darker. And then I was getting older, and I'd be like, no, I'm dark. And my friends be looking at me like, girl, I have this one friend. She'd be like, you look like some white toast. And I was like, no, I'm not white toast. And so we always crack jokes going back and forth. But it's true. I ended up just spending more time inside, whereas in DR, we'd be playing outside in the
That's
streets
right.
all the time. But I couldn't do that in Boston because we lived on a busy one-way street, and those carros, man, they were like, shum, 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 shum.
Yo,
So,
and I don't even know why I brought that up. I know I was getting to a point. I was saying something. I brought up a reason why I said
Afro-Boricua.
Afro-Boricua, but I forgot what I was going with that. There was a reason why I brought it up. I wanted to speak to something you said. Oh,
Oh,
so
yep.
working at Rutgers,
Hmm.
I brought my Black mindset. You know what I'm saying? So the only thing, it's interesting because in my sort of my self-developmental process, as I was sort of exploring the self when I was a young adult in my early 20s, um, I couldn't find, and like I would go to the self-help section of the library to sort of figure out what was going on with me. But I also
Mm.
went to the Black history section of the library.
Mm.
I felt drawn to that section. And I found a lot. So I was able to sort of bring those two worlds together, which supported me in my self-development. But
Hmm.
a lot of what I was learning with the self-help books, I was also learning about the advocacy piece through the Black history books, right? I'm trying to understand what Black history meant, what it meant to sort of be an advocate in the world that we lived in, not even
Hmm.
understanding the context of white supremacy yet. Something about that sort of plight that people dealt with, Black people in America, sort of resonated with me, and I couldn't find that yet, at least in a Puerto Rican context.
Hmm.
So I resonated more with that, and so that sort of set the foundation for eventually me sort of identifying as Afro-Boricua, because of I understood the spirit of our people. Even though we've all been colonized in different parts of the New World, we're all part of that sort of experience of colonization, genocide, and enslavement of Black and Indigenous people. And so that's sort of set the foundation to how I identify. And so when I went into Rutgers, I came in Black Power. They was looking at me like I was something, like I don't know what they thought, but
They wasn't ready.
Black Power to come in. You feel me? Because a lot of Latinos assimilate to whiteness, right? That we want to go that way.
Yeah.
And for me, I was not about that, like, because I just, that's not me. You know what I'm saying? And so and that really shook them, because they couldn't understand what they was dealing with. And I said, you wanted somebody to come in and sort of speak to some of the challenges that this counseling center is dealing with based on the criticism of the Black and brown students. And so that's what I'm doing. Just your butt hurt don't mean it's my fault. Just because your white fragility is popping up all over the place, mean that I have to take accountability for that. And so that's what I dealt with. And so that was the thing that sort of pushed me forward into the liberated self therapeutic services, because I couldn't deal with it no more. You know what I'm saying? It was really, and I was the team lead of our diversity committee called the Justice and Equity team. And I was leading the shit out of that team, and we got real radicalized. And this is my colleagues, you know, and it was a mix. It was Black, brown, and Asian, and white. And so we became a force that leadership could not deal with. And so they villainized me, like they really villainized me and demonized me in a way that I never thought could happen, considering that the work that I was doing was advocacy work, right? In a mental health sort of context. So that was an awakening, because that's, I mean, I don't want to run on, you know, sort of be long-winded, but when I think about like my experience in the mental health field, I pressed up against white supremacy, except I didn't know it yet. Right? Looking back in retrospect, I'm able now to recognize, oh shit, this is what I've been dealing with all along, except I didn't know language to say it. That's why I got unpacking white supremacy in the mental health field, because I'm sure there's so many people that is where I used to be, right? Not knowing what we're dealing with. And so to sort of bring that sort of awareness to that topic is important to me, because we need to know what we're dealing with. Because we're dealing with imposter syndrome. We think we're not good enough, but it's never about any of that. It's about white supremacy that we're responding to. And so, yeah, that's how I got pushed into the liberated self, is having to get away from the impact, that particular systemic racism at Rutgers, and sort of create my own stuff, because I don't have another choice.
The universe was like, you're not listening. You need to go open your own business.
Like, no, so unfair. Like, this is an injustice. But it was either that or, you know, me get locked up or something and lose my license. And I'm not letting white people, after all this that I've done to get my license, I'm not going to let you drag me into no craziness. Deuces.
But, and you know, thank you for sharing that, because what you're talking about is something that across many fields, or all fields, I'm sure, is experience, where companies and agencies or systems will say they want something, and then you come through with said something, and then they're like, oh shit, I don't know what to do with this. And then they make it hard for you to stay, right? And then individuals have to make their exit. I mean, I have that conversation in some way, shape, or form with so many clients all the time, right? Where it's the systemic racism coming out in, whether it's corporate America or, you know, public health or city jobs or whatever it might be. And they're like, they say they want this. I was hired for this. And they're stifling me.
Yo, you know, this conversation triggers me so much. This is why I can't, sometimes I gotta like stay away from what's happening in the world, even though I can't stay away from it. Because because it's funny, because when you talk about stifling, when I did the Liberated Self seminar, white leadership did everything in their power to stop it. Okay? Everything. Even though I had all the, like, everything was like organized. It was like, I had it in my annual plans, my annual goals. Like, but when it was actually come to like, to do it, like, oh, well, we have questions to draw it out. Like, I was like, oh my goodness, it was maddening. Like it made me crazy. Like this is work. We're supposed to be in a professional environment,
Mm.
counseling center, serving Black and brown students. I'm creating something specifically for them, and I'm getting all of this resistance from the
Right.
white leadership. Like it was, and so that stifling, like, I mean, and I know it's not only in our field, right? Like you said, it's everywhere, and it
Mm.
really is everywhere. That's why I don't believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
No,
I
I
don't
don't get
believe
me
in
started
it.
on that shit. All the certificates popping up for that now,
I
and
don't give a shit about. Don't tell me diversity, equity, and nothing about your company. You don't even have to. You don't even have to promote that if it was really that.
woo.
We don't have to say that's what it is, because you will know it's just everything about it. We was, for example, for example, your practice, right? We know you don't have to say nothing about diversity, equity, inclusion. We get it. You for the people, by the people. It's clear. And so when we not so, and that's the thing that I recognize is that when we sort of those sound bites will lure us in. Diversity, equity, inclusion. We're the most diverse. You know, it's no, you're not.
Mm.
The optics look that way, but
Hmm.
the lived experience is not that. And so that whole like when these white giant corporations start sort of promoting that, I all of a sudden I give them a side eye. Like I don't trust you. Stop
Right.
playing with us, because they try to fool us, and then we get the experience that I've experienced, and a whole bunch of other people have experienced. And it's
Hmm.
very, very. It just makes me trust you less.
Right. That's a red flag for me immediately. And especially if I look at your team, or whatever, the organizational chart, and that DEI person is your one person of color, and then everybody, like, come on, man. That's all the red flags.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Mm. So, question for you. Our theme this month
yeah.
is compassion. And so I'm curious, what did, maybe you didn't call it compassion at that time, so I want to acknowledge that, because sometimes we might think it's something else, but how did you extend compassion to yourself while you were still within that organization, and also as you started to make your exit?
Well, part of what had me be an advocate, sort of speak up and speak out, is my compassion that I do have for myself, right?
Mm.
It, to be able to sort of resist white supremacy in the way that I was doing in that particular context, it was an act of self-love, right?
Mm.
So it was all compassion, right, for myself. There was never a moment that I wasn't compassionate with myself. And compassion is something, I was talking to you earlier before we started recording around my sort of the way I feel about creatures. Like I don't ever
Yeah.
want to harm creatures, right? Like I feel like it was because I have compassion for all life, right?
Mm.
And I'm an empath, naturally. And so that's always been intact. And so it was never, my compassion has always been there for me, like, and other people. Like I've always, and I think I think the compassion comes from the empathy, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of, the compassion that I have for human beings comes from the fact that I'm empathetical, right? I'm an empath,
Yeah.
and so the compassion never left. Um, what I will say is my compassion for white folk left.
Mm.
I've always been compassionate for all human beings. I don't care what your
Mhm.
race is. I don't care what your gender is, what your orientation is. I've always been compassionate. I've always been that kid. But
Mm.
now, my compassion for white people got sucked out of me. Like,
Mm.
I don't got the time and patience. You crying your little crocodile tears, I don't got time and patience for that. I don't care. Because, when I think about what's going on, especially to Black people in America, they don't have any compassion for us.
Right.
To extend compassion to a group of people who refuse to acknowledge the humanity of Black people in America,
Mm.
that's, I'm being generous if I'm being compassionate to you,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And so when you don't have the same generosity for our people, you don't get that from me.
Mm.
I'm not, you know what I'm saying? So my compassion has always been something, and I think the compassion comes from um at the age of 13 I started writing in journals, and
Mm.
so I've always been writing. I still write in journals today. It's been over 30 years, and the journals, I think, is what taught me sort of, because there was the empathy is already intrinsic. Every baby is born with empathy.
Mhm.
I got a book upstairs and I forgot what it's called, but it's something about love. And it's a powerful book. And they did a study on I think it was third graders, that the third graders, they brought a baby in to see what the third graders would do with the newborn.
Mm.
And all of the third graders, no matter who they were, was all coming to the newborn in a caring, loving, compassionate way.
No.
Right. And so biologically, we are all compassionate beings.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so what happens in life is that when we deal with all our life experiences, like our defining moments, and some of them are very negative, it sort of shuts us off from being compassionate. And I think that's what makes white supremacy so dangerous, is when you're like in a context of white supremacy and you're growing up as a child and you happen to be white or black or brown or any one of us, because we all are being sort of internalizing the same conditioning.
Right.
It sort of strips you away from your compassion as a human being, and that's very dangerous. And I think that's why we see what we're seeing with this mass shootings. Like, you have to disconnect yourself from your own humanity in order to do something like that.
To do that, right?
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So but there's a process to sort of strip someone away from their compassion, and I think white supremacy has a lot to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that part too, right? And if you get the chance, if you could email me the name of the book, and I'll drop it in the show notes for people, because that sounds, I mean, it's amazing and it's true, right? When we look at children, who do they interact with? How do they interact with people, and so on and so forth? It's so beautiful. It's so pure and closer to self energy, right? Compassion is part of our self energy that gets really protected by parts, because over the years, different experiences we have impacted. And so I appreciate that, because I think we forget, a lot of people forget what that compassion looks and feels like, especially if you've, not you, but universal, you have gone through a number of traumatic experiences, or maybe not even full blown traumatic if people are thinking about it on a scale. But if it's consistent enough, it's traumatic and it fucks with you, right? It will impact your view on this world. It will impact your view on how you interact with people.
That's right. And then, when you think about compassion, to extend compassion to other human beings, makes you very vulnerable, right?
Yes.
That's a vulnerable space to be in. And so the way you were just describing it, right? When all that shit happens in a trauma, that sort of, we create like a callus around ourselves, right? As a way of protection, not like by choice, but by sort of default, right? Because of the fact that we have to survive this world. And so I don't know, there was like a meme somewhere on Facebook or something. It was amazing. They said, if you close your heart off if you close your heart because you're avoiding being hurt, you're also closing your heart from being loved. Right. And it's that sort of, so we develop this callousness, right? Which doesn't allow us to be vulnerable enough to now be compassionate. Right. And so yeah, like all that. And we have to find a way to like break through that, because a lot of it is the unhealed wounds, which we call trauma. We need a lot of healing, man. I mean, seriously.
To address all of the layers of experiences, both that are our own, that we've navigated, but also those of our ancestors that have been passed down generational. And when you say it, there's parts of me that I'd be like, fuck this, that's a lot of work.
The word.
Because it is. And I know that the work that we're doing for our communities and for ourselves individually is super fucking dope, and it's going to have its impact for our future generations, right? Like, that's the piece that I remind myself of every time I want to like just say fuck it and throw it out the window. I look at my 3-year-old and I'm like, no, give it back, man. We can't throw it out the window.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think sort of keeping your eye on the prize is sort of our way of sort of practicing being in integrity with our higher selves, right? Or the liberated self. And I think that's so important to keep in mind, because it's so easy to get sucked into like feeling demoralized and disheartened, right? Which a lot of us do. We become, cynical, right? We become resigned to the world. And but that's not, I don't know if that's living, I don't know if that's us being alive fully, to sort of go into that dark space and like submit ourselves, right, to like oppression or whatever it is we're dealing with. And so to keep on keeping on, right? That sort of effort that it takes is a way we honor ourselves, because how else can we celebrate life if we're not celebrating the higher self, right? If we're not celebrating the fact that we can actually step into being liberated, like, and honoring our people, whether it's our ancestors or the future ones that are coming. You know what I'm saying? So like, to me, it's like a beautiful thing to be able to stay in it, to keep on keeping on. That's a, I mean, that's the most rebellious thing we can do as Black and brown folks.
Woo!
Keeping on.
Yes.
You ain't stopping me.
No.
Yeah.
We just out here getting stronger.
Sometimes we get, you know, I get sucked in sometimes, and I be feeling like mad icky and shit, and I forget, and I forget, and I forget. But then I remember, right? Because the forgetting part is intentional. You want me to forget my greatness.
Right.
I'm not doing it.
No.
I'm not doing it.
We're not going back in that fucking cave.
We're not doing it, though. I mean, I'm not doing it.
Oh yeah.
We can't, like, we can't go back, Vanessa.
No, we're not going back.
You feel me?
Not doing
Damn
it.
it. It takes everything. I know it does, but it's like once you wake up, you can't go back to sleep. You just can't. To know that, let me pretend that the okie doke is really real enough to oppress me. That's bugged out to me. That's bugged out to me. And I don't want to say what it reminds me of, because this maybe kids will listen, but it kind of reminds me of Santa Claus. I still kind of believe in Santa Claus, the magic of Santa Claus, but I don't say that. I know that motherfucker's not real.
Nope. And children shouldn't be listening to this shit. I always say it's explicit. Don't listen. Oh, goodness. Okay. So before we wrap up, is there anything that you wanted to share that maybe I didn't ask you about?
Oh, damn, I don't know.
I know we covered a whole lot. We did. But I always like to double check.
I have no clue what you didn't ask me about. Okay.
Well, that's good. I do my job. Got it.
I have no clue what, because there's so many different aspects of us as human beings. I mean, we can go into basically any topic and sort of unpack a whole bunch of stuff, right?
Right.
So we know that we have a short conversation, so obviously we can't unpack everything or sort of get into everything. And so, yeah, I don't know. What you think you might have needed to ask me that you didn't ask yet?
I don't think there's anything else. I mean, real talk, my biggest thing was like, I love the title. How did he get to it? And then look at where it brought us. It brought us our whole conversation around Liberated Self.
Yeah.
Which is just, it's just so dope. I truly and deeply appreciate the work that you're doing, and that we found each other on good old Instagram.
Yes.
We're mad at Instagram because they keep deleting your videos.
They keep deleting my videos.
I subscribe to your YouTube now, so
can you imagine that all of the video, like I have 10 now, right? So before the 10th one, which was, I think, was it this week? It was one of these weeks. I think it was
this week.
It was this week, Tuesday. Out of the 9 videos before that, they deleted 6. So the first 3 are not touched, but everyone after that was touched. Everyone after that, which I just can't understand. I mean, you see people on Instagram saying all kind of ratchetness, saying all kind of craziness, and they never get deleted. Their videos are there forever. My videos, my little innocent videos, all we're doing is unpacking white supremacy, somehow keep getting deleted. And it just, God, that bothers the fuck out of me. Because it's like the freedom, it reminds me of the critical race theory books being banned everywhere. Like now conversations are being banned, and what does that mean about what our society we live in? What does it say about the world we live in, right? And we're not even, the goal is not to bash anybody. The goal is to talk about our lived experiences, which are often not heard. right? And I'm specifically looking at mental health professionals because that's the field I'm in.
Right.
But that also drives me as well to sort of expand on the conversation even harder.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because you're making me have to think outside the box, which is okay because this is what white supremacy does to us. It forces us outside of the box to
Right.
come up with other ways, creative ways of having the same conversation. So the unpacking white supremacy, that's not done for me. I feel like there's so much to unpack,
Right.
and not even specifically in the mental health field. So I have a lot of ideas that's connected to that particular unpacking white supremacy that I'm going to sort of move forward with. Even if Instagram don't fuck with me, okay, Instagram. There's other
Whatever.
ways we can speak to our people.
Bye.
Other ways.
Right.
Before there was Instagram, there was, when you think about all the people out there in the streets that was speaking to our people, trying to liberate our people, you think they used
Mm-hmm.
Instagram? No, there was no Instagram.
Right.
There was no Instagram. Yeah, so that's what I need to say.
I know you will do it.
Hacking white supremacy conversation in different sort of ways, right? It's not
Yeah.
going to be the same, but yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
That's the conversation will be had.
That's so, and it might not be televised.
Be like that. Well, thank you so much, Antonio, for coming through. I deeply appreciate you. I say that so many times and I will keep saying it. The work you're doing is amazing. The conversations you're holding need to be held. And I'm glad that we met and that we can continue our conversations because I not only enjoy them and I recognize how important they are. It speaks to my liberated self, and that is what I'm hoping to do with the podcast is that it continues to have its ripple effect and reaching out to other people.
That's right. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for having me on this. And I really appreciate you having me and as a guest. I mean, really, I do. I mean, it was pretty dope. And, I dig your vibe. So it was perfect.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you. Thank you for that, for the invitation.
Yeah. And for all of y'all listening, if you are curious on how to connect, don't you worry. All of his info will be in the show notes, website, Instagram, all of that good stuff. And don't be greedy. Share this with the homies. Y'all already know what's up. And we are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all of that good stuff. And if you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to send us an email or hit us up on Instagram. But until next time, I hope y'all have nothing short of a beautiful fucking day. Peace.
Power to the people.